From the studios of Farm Journal Broadcast, this is AgDay.
Coming up on AgDay, two big stories we're following. A popular event showcasing pork products around the world suddenly canceled.
You know, we've done this before when we were very concerned about the well-being of the U.S. hog herd.
The calm before the storm.
And a massive winter storm hitting the heartland again, raising new concerns.
We will see some flooding again.
AgDay, presented by the all-new Chevy Silverado, the strongest, most advanced Silverado ever.
Good morning, I'm Clinton Griffiths. A powerful winter storm now moving into the Midwest, carrying with it wet snow and high winds, continuing to bring wet weather to areas where the ground is already saturated. Meteorologist Cindy Clausen is continuing to track it. She kicks off our team coverage. Cindy.
Well, thanks, Clinton. Yeah, it is a nasty, nasty winter storm here in the spring months. We are looking at blizzard conditions, especially on the backside of this low pressure system. It's a powerful low. I kept those isobars on because where you see them more tightly packed, that's where those windy conditions are. So not only are we going to be seeing some very heavy snow, but very windy conditions, and that leads to those blizzard conditions. As we head through the day, we're going to see that low pressure system move on up to the north, and so that's going to be bringing those blizzard conditions then more into the upper Midwest. Then watch what happens as we get into this evening. We're going to see showers and thunderstorms developing along and ahead of the cold front. So that's going to bring the potential for some strong to perhaps even severe storms to parts of the Corn Belt, into eastern Illinois, on into parts of northern and central Indiana, even into lower Michigan as well. So we'll keep an eye on that for you. Eventually, as this keeps pushing off to the north, we'll see that low pressure continue to weaken. Now, as far as snowfall, we are looking at a lot of it. We've already seen a good deal, and we're going to be seeing many of these areas well over a foot of snow from Minnesota all the way down into parts of northern Nebraska. Winds obviously very, very strong once again today, especially in the nation's midsection and into the southwestern United States. And overnight, we continue with the winds in the north central United States. I'll have a lot more in your forecast coming up a little bit later on in the show. Clinton?
All right, thanks, Cindy. Now, the potential impacts for agriculture are significant. In the blizzard-affected areas, states like Colorado still have nearly a third of cows left to calve. Winter wheat is also at risk of freeze damage, with the areas of western Oklahoma and northern Texas well ahead in maturity. USDA meteorologist Brad Rippey is also tracking the storm. And Brad, here we are, the same areas getting hit once again.
It's amazing that we're talking 4 weeks ago, we had an almost carbon copy storm moving across the same region. Last time we had frozen soils, we had snowpack in place, and so all of the moisture just flashed right off of the soil into the waterways. This time we at least have soils that are not frozen, albeit the fact that they are saturated, we still will see runoff. We will see some renewed flooding. Some of the northern watershed areas that have been experiencing moderate to major snowmelt flooding, such as the James River, the Big Sioux River, the Minnesota, the upper Mississippi. This is going to be a blow to that region because we're going to be putting a lot of moisture back into those basins as the snow begins to melt. And so this will aggravate the already serious flood situation there. I think we're going to dump enough snow in the Red River Basin that we could aggravate the flood situation there. And that water, of course, flows northward along the Minnesota-North Dakota border.
And it sounds like there's a chance for severe weather to the east and possibly severe weather and rain down south over the weekend. Brad, it's planting season. What kind of impact are we seeing on field work now?
A strict comparison to last year, we are behind where we were this time last year in terms of starting any field work in the western Corn Belt. Some of the eastern areas are actually doing a little bit better than they were this time last year. It's wet, but it's not as saturated as last year at this time. The one thing that, looking ahead here, it looks like a pretty active storm track will continue. And so, for example, this time next week, we're looking at the potential for another fairly significant storm moving through the upper Midwest. That, of course, would be another setback to starting field work.
Now, looking longer term, do we have any idea where the climate will take us through spring and into summer? Of course, we're talking about an El Nino here. What's that setup looking like?
That's really the big question at this point is, does El Nino stick with us through the summer months and into the next fall? a lot of uncertainty about that right now, and so we will be watching climate trends coming in out of the Pacific over the next few weeks and months to see just how that plays out. El Nino, if it were to stick around through the summer months, that tends to be a rainmaker, and so we would expect an active pattern to continue if that does happen.
All right, thanks, Brad. Now the pictures from the ground are starting to pour in. AgDay's Betsy Gibbon has been talking with producers in the impacted areas. She joins us from the newsroom.
Clinton, for some South Dakota ranchers, this is the second blizzard they've experienced in less than a month, and it has terrible timing, arriving during calving season.
Just snow and freezing rain for now. I think it's the calm before the storm.
That's the voice of Marty Williams, a rancher in Wall, South Dakota. You can hear how the ground is just a sheet of ice from the freezing rain, with ranchers like Williams worried they will lose power. The same goes for more producers waiting on the worst of the storm today.
And now it's turning to snow. They're saying between 8 and 24 inches. I don't know how many we'll get, but I got them in the best place I got.
This is just some of what South Dakota and adjacent states saw Wednesday. Some areas expecting over a foot of snow today. Areas in the north and northeast not only blanketed, but buried with wet, heavy snow.
But there is more coming. But we have them close to the barn so we can take them in and get the calves, have them calve in the barn and nice and warm.
Some ranchers and cow-calf producers I'm talking with are bracing for losing power due to some of that thick, heavy ice, and they're also waiting for more snow to fall.
Betsy, thanks. Ice jams still an issue in all of this. Experts say pressure from ice buildup on the water below this bridge in Norman County, Minnesota, caused a steel structure that protects the bridge to fail. About 50 miles southwest of that, in West Fargo, North Dakota, the state's National Guard helping lay sandbags ahead of anticipated rising waters. And further north, in Grand Forks, North Dakota, flooding led to several road closures. This storm started in the Pacific, and first it brought heavy rain and snow melt to parts of Oregon. That caused the Willamette River to continue to rise in Portland. The river usually hovers around 4 feet above the water gauge, but the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration expects the river to rise up to nearly 14 feet by today. On Wednesday, South Africa announcing an outbreak of African swine fever on a farm in one of the country's northwest provinces. Officials with the World Organization for Animal Health say the incident may be linked to contact with wild animals. And that leads to another big story we're following. The rising threat of ASF globally is why the National Pork Producers Council has decided to cancel this year's World Pork Expo. The NPPC's board of directors saying the decision is out of an abundance of caution as the disease continues to spread. They stress that the risk to U.S. hog producers is still considered negligible, but the impact to the industry if ASF were to show up in the U.S. would be severe.
And while we think it's very unlikely that World Pork Expo would be the reason for it to spread to the United States, we can't say that probability is zero. And so because the health of the U.S. swine herd, the livelihoods of our producers and their families is paramount for us, we decided to exercise extreme caution and to make this decision.
We rely so heavily on exports here in the U.S. We've really seen some great momentum. We've worked really hard to get to where we are today. If African swine fever were to break out in the U.S., we would lose our export status immediately. And so the other time that World Pork Expo was canceled was back in 2001. And that was because there was a foot and mouth disease outbreak in England at the time. You know, we've done this before when we were very concerned about the well-being of the U.S. hog herd.
The decision comes as more than 100 U.S. pork producers gather in Washington this week. They're asking Congress to appropriate funding for 600 new U.S. Customs and Border Protection agricultural inspectors to help defend against ASF. Now, the World Pork Expo, held each June at the Iowa State Fairgrounds in Des Moines, is the largest pork industry-specific trade show in the world. It typically hosts 20,000 visitors over 3 days. USDA reporting a flash sale of 133,000 metric tons of soybeans but is for delivery to unknown destinations, some assuming it's China. The Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin telling members at a House Financial Services hearing this week, China has committed to significant orders for U.S. beans. U.S. and Chinese negotiators have also discussed reducing tariffs on ethanol, as well as offsetting duties and anti-dumping measures on dry distillers grain. USDA Secretary Sonny Perdue saying there have been conversations with China on reducing the tariff on ethanol, which would be good for the U.S. corn industry. We have more on pork with a focus on prices and why we've seen some swings in the market. And as we go to break, another look at the powerful storm hitting the heartland again. These pictures from the South Dakota Highway Patrol. Officers asking people to just stay home. Hazardous travel conditions reported across the state and into parts of Minnesota. We'll be right back with more on AgDay.
AgDay, brought to you by Corvus Corn Herbicide from Bayer. Get an early season win against weeds with Corvus for end of season rewards.
Soybeans on the rise on Wednesday on optimism a trade deal can be worked out with China. Here's an update from the CNN.
Today in the grain market, the soybeans were mixed. They really traded on both sides of unchanged. The trade deal may have to wait until June. That was a little bit of a disappointment. I think that stalled the market a little bit. So any idea that we were close is really kind of gone at this point right now. We know that we've got this big winter weather here that might delay some planting for the soybeans and for the corn for that matter as well. But any damage or any difficulty has still yet to be determined because the storm really just started today. Corn was also firm. That winter storm just does concern some traders. I think the USDA info has been digested, all the bearish news, and the winter weather is also delaying that planting, so that might have given the market a little bit of lift, and I think that that's why the market firmed up.
We've seen fluctuations in the U.S. hog market recently. Betsy Gibbon has a look at what's driving those changes in today's analysis with Don Close of Rabobank.
Don, let's talk a little bit about the hog market right now. Hogs have been having some huge daily ranges over the last couple of trading sessions. Can you explain what's going on in that market right now?
I think there's been two things that have been the driver. The first off is just the redistribution of hogs here in the States. As the new additional plant has come online in Iowa, there are a lot of hogs that were initially programmed to go to that plant that have been in the open market that were pulled off once they started processing. That combined with the building and pent-up energy with the uncertainties with China, when those two factors both arrived at the same time, was the stimulus for the earlier than expected rally in hog prices.
Speaking of China, of course, African swine fever has been a big concern in China, as you know. Do you think that will shift trading patterns over the next 1 to 2 years when it comes to global meat supplies?
I don't think there's any question about it. From all of the data that we have, the bank is currently in the process of revising our estimates of just what the level of liquidation will be. The other thing with swine fever in Eastern Europe, the continuous risk of that spreading into Western Europe with whole country blockades that would be in place, 70% of the pork imports into China are currently coming from the EU. So if we see any complexities or worsening with the disease going into Western Europe, it could cause an incredibly bullish scenario for pork in the United States.
All right. Well, thanks, Don. Appreciate the time. We'll be back with more Ag Day here in just a moment.
Closed captioning is brought to you by BASF. Grow smart with BASF. We create chemistry.
Welcome back to Ag Day. Your meteorologist Cindy Clausen, and you've been tracking this storm really closely for us. And we know there's going to be a lot of snow in places, but the liquid, the water that comes out of this storm is going to be huge.
Exactly, the liquid equivalent, and then of course how fast any of that snow is going to be melting is going to be a big problem as we look forward. But let's deal with the storm while we're still seeing it on the map. And as I mentioned earlier in the show, we're going to be dealing with very heavy snow, well over a foot, and in some cases closer to 2 feet of snow between parts parts of Minneapolis into Minnesota, all into southern South Dakota, and even into the northern parts of Nebraska as well. That low continues to pull on off to the northeast. Then as we get into tonight, we're going to start to really see that moisture converge along the cold front. So that's going to be bringing the threat of showers and thunderstorms and potentially some of those strong or severe this evening as it moves into parts of Illinois and Indiana. It'll weaken some as we get into the overnight hours, but we're going to dump a lot of rain with this. The low pressure systems where all the snow and the cold air is, that continues to push on off, now moving into Canada as we get into the overnight hours and into Friday. So we're going to be seeing some drying conditions then in the plains as we get into Friday evening. All right, here's your precipitation estimate. This is what we are estimating what has already fallen in the past 24 hours. Now, a lot of this in the form of snow, but the liquid equivalent of that, over an inch in a lot of these areas, and you add on the next 24 hours, we're going to be seeing 2 to 3+ inches of liquid equivalent out of that snow that's pushing into parts of the northern plains and into the upper Midwest. Now, as far as the snowfall, this is the wider picture, so some of the areas you can see in the Intermountain West will be getting some snow as well, but the big brunt of it is going to be right here with this very, very strong storm. Temperature-wise, still a pretty big difference between the 26 in Rapid City and the near 90 degrees in Brownsville today. Heading into tonight, we're going to see some cooler air starting to come into parts of the Central Plains states where we're going to see those temperatures down into the 20s and 30s. Still that surge of moisture in the eastern Corn Belt, and as we get into your Thursday or Friday forecast, we're going to be seeing some cooler temperatures now starting to come into parts of the Corn Belt. All right, as far as that jet stream, there you can see it. That's going to be moving up with that cutoff low there. Another trough moves through the nation's midsection over the weekend. We'll have another one comes in towards the middle part of next week. That's a look at your national forecast. Now let's check out the weather where you live. Mammoth, Arizona, sunny and breezy for you today with a high of 75 degrees. Springview, Nebraska, heavy snow and blowing snow, high of 30. And Pittsfield, New Hampshire, sunny and warmer with a high of 53 degrees.
Still ahead, the impact this wild spring weather could have on cattle prices, and later, it may just be a picture, but it's of something we've never seen before.
Drover's Report is sponsored by Corteva Agriscience, Agriculture Division of Dow DuPont, your partner in range and pasture productivity.
The cattle market has been doing well for a while now, but experts say the weather in the heartland could have an impact on things.
We're caught between a rock and a hard place here. On one hand, we're looking at the weather here for the weekend, or for midweek into the weekend, and that could cause some problems. At the very least, weights could be a question. But on the other hand, you've got hogs limit down. So in between, we've been kind of straddling unchanged, been on both sides of unchanged. Longer term, once we get the weather out of the way, this is sort of the seasonal time frame where we could see cattle roll over to the downside a little bit.
Seifert says if there's continued strength in the hog market, that could help soften some of those losses for beef. Cattlemen in California have approved the state's first cattle council. Results show 68% of producers favored having one. California Governor Jerry Brown signed a bill into law last year which established the process by which farmers and ranchers could create the California Cattle Council. The Cattle Council mandates a $1 per head assessment on all cattle sold, and it provides provisions for a refund for those who want it. The projected income is about $3 million annually.
Cattle Council will provide funds for research and education to help the cattle industry combat some of the environmental claims that are being made and show that cattle can be environmentally beneficial to the rangelands and the wildlife habitat.
The funds cannot be used for lobbying, campaign contributions, or litigation. The Cattle Council will be under the control of a local board made up of cattle producers. All right, it used to be something you only read about in books or saw in the movies, but now theory is becoming fact, all thanks to one picture. Next. Have you seen this yet? Scientists revealing the first image ever made of a black hole. That's pretty incredible. Take a look. Astronomers say they put it together using data gathered by 8 telescopes around the world. It is considered a supermassive black hole at the center of a galaxy known as M87. Now it's estimated to be about 55 million light years from Earth. Scientists believe it has a mass that is billions of times bigger than our own sun.
The bright patch in the south that you see tells us that material moving around the black hole is moving at light speeds, which is also consistent with our simulations and predictions. And this image forges a clear link now between supermassive black holes and the engines of bright galaxies. We now know clearly that black holes drive large-scale structure in the universe from their home in these galaxies.
Nothing, not even light, escapes from the supermassive black holes. They are the light-sucking monsters of the universe, theorized by Einstein more than a century ago, and now confirmed by the work of these scientists. That's all the time we have this morning. We're sure glad you tuned in. It's been part of your day with us. From all of us here at AgDay, have a great day out in farm country.